Good evening. This is Michael Tanner. I am going to go again with our The Emperor's Blades by Brian Stavenley. This is according to it's 10 p.m. when we do this. Well, I do this, right? And then hopefully somebody will edit it. And if it doesn't get edited, well, we're going to push it up anyway because we need to get going. This is chapter 2, and it's been a good read so far. But I am Michael Tanner, and you can reach me at www.dicemediagroup.com. Caden crossed his legs just outside Ashland's central square at a run. Then he slowed and entered the courtyard. His alarm, so sharp and palpable, when he first saw the slaughtered goat, he had faded as he descended from the high peaks and drew closer to the warmth and companionship of the monastery. Now, moving forward toward the main cluster of buildings, he felt foolish to have run so fast. Whatever killed the animal remained a mystery, to be sure, but the mountain trails posed their own dangers, especially to someone foolish enough to run them in the darkness. Caden slowed to walk, gathered his thoughts. Bad enough I lost the goat. Hang would whip me bloody if I managed to break my own leg in the process. The gravel of the monastery pass crunched beneath his feet, and only sound save for his keening of the wind as gusted and fell, skirling through the gnarled branches and between cold stones. The monks were all inside already, hunched over with their bowls or seated cross-legged in the meditation halls, fasting and pursuing emptiness. When he reached the refectory, a long, slow stone building weathered by the storm and rain until it looked almost a part of the mountain itself. Caden paused to scoop a handful of water from the wooden barrel outside the door. As the draft washed down his throat, he looked at a moment to steady his breathing and slow his heart. It wouldn't do to approach his new mile in the state of mental disarray. Above all else, Shin valued stillness, clarity. Caden had been whipped by his masters for rushing, for shouting, for acting in haste, or moving without consideration. Besides, he was home now. Whatever killed the goat wasn't likely to come prowling among the stern buildings. Up close, Ashland's didn't look like much, especially at night. 3 long stone halls with wooden roofs, a dormitory, refectory, and a meditation hall, forming the 3 sides of the rough square. Their pale granite walls washed as though with milk in the moonlight. The whole compound perched on the cliff edge, and the fourth side of the square opened onto a cloud sky. An unobstructed view of the foothills and the distant steppe to the west. Already the grasslands far below were vibrant with the spring froth of flowers, swaying with blue chandeliers, clusters with nuns' blossoms, a riot of tiny white faith knots. At night, however, beneath the cold, inscrutable gaze of the stars, the steppe was invisible. Staring out the past of the ledges, Caden found himself facing a vast emptiness, a great dark void. It felt as though Ashland stood at the world's end, clinging to the cliffs, holding vigil against nothingness that threatened to engulf creation. After a second swing of the water, he turned away. The night had grown cold, and now he had stopped running. Gusts of wind off to the Bellin Mountains sliced through his sweaty robe like shards of ice. With a rumble in his stomach, he turned towards the yellow glow and murmur of conversation emanating from the windows of the refectory. At this hour, just after sunset, but before night prayer, most of the monks would be taking modest evening meal of salt and button, turnips, hard dark bread. Heng, Caden's warden Umno, would be inside with the rest. With any luck, Caden could report that he had seen, dash off a quick painting to show his scene, and sit down in the warm meal of his own. Shin fare was far more meager than the deliciousness, or the delicacies, he remembered from his early years in the Dawn Palace, before his father sent him away. But the monks had a saying, hunger is flavor. They were great ones for sayings, the Shin passing them from one generation to the next, as though trying to make up for Order's lack of liturgy and formal ritual. The blank god cared for nothing for the pomp and pageantry of the urban temples, while the young gods gluttoned themselves on music, prayer, and offerings laid upon elaborate altars. The blank god demanded that the Shin only one thing, sacrifice, not of wine or wealth, but of the self. The mind is a flame, the monk said. Blow it out. After 8 years, Caden still wasn't sure what that meant, and his stomach rumbling impatiently, he couldn't be bothered to contemplate it. He pushed open the heavy refectory doors and let in a gentle hum of conversation wash over him. Monks were scattered around the hall, some at rough tables, their blank heads, their bent over their bowls, others standing in front of the fire that crackled in the hearth at the far end of the room. Several sat playing stones with their eyes and blanked their studied lines in resistance and attack unfolding across the board. The men were varied as the lands they came from. Tall, pale, blocky Edensmen, far from the north, where the sea spent half the year as ice. Wiry hands, the forearms inked with patterns of jungle tribes just north of the waist. Even few Manjari, green-eyed, their brown skin and a shade darker than Caden's own. Despite their desperate appearances, however, the monks shared something, a hardness, a stillness, born of a life in the hard, still mountains, far from the comforts of the world where they had been raised. The Shin were a small order, with barely 200 monks at Ashkelon. The young gods, Ira, Heket, Oel, and the rest drew adherents from continents and enjoyed temples in almost every town and city, palatial spaces draped with silk and crusted with gold, some of which rivaled the dwellings of the richest ministers in Etrips. Heket alone must have commanded thousands of priests and 10 times that number, who came to worship at his altar when they felt the need of courage. The less savory gods, they had their adherents as well. Stories abounded of the halls of Rambashir and the bloody servants of Anishel. Tales of chalices carved from skulls and dripping marrow, the infants strangled in their sleep, of dark orgies of where sex and death were hideously mingled. Some claimed that only 1/10 of those who entered the temple doors ever returned. Taken by the Lord of Bones, people whispered, taken by Death himself. The older gods, aloof with their world of indifferent to the affairs of humans, drew fewer adherents. Nonetheless, they had their names, Intara and her consort, Hol the Bat, Ptah and Astern, and scattered throughout the 3 continents thousands of worshippers who those names. Only the Blinkrod remained nameless, faceless. The Shin held he was the oldest and most cryptic and powerful outside Ashkelon. Most people thought he was dead or had never existed, slaughtered by the namesake. He was when she said the world and the heaven and the stars. That seemed perfectly plausible to Caden. He had no sign of the god in his years running up and down the mountain passes. He scanned the room for his fellow acolytes, and from the table where the wall, a keel caught his eye. He seated along the long bench with Sirkhan and Fiaram and Prun, the only acolyte Ashkelon who maintained his girth despite the endless running, hauling, and building required by the older monks. Caden nodded in response and was about to cross to them when he spotted Hang, the older side of the hall. He stifled a sigh. Umio would impose some sort of nasty penance if his pupil sat down to dinner without reporting back first. Hopefully it wouldn't take long to relate the tale of the slaughtered goat. Then Caden could join the others, and he could finally have a bowl of stew. Hugh Hang was hard to miss. In many ways, he seemed like he belonged to one of the fine wine halls of Anur rather than here, cloistered in a remote monastery 100 leagues beyond the border of the empire. While the other monks went about their duties with their quiet sobriety, Hang hummed as he tended the goats, sang as he lugged great sacks of clay up from the shallows, and kept up a steady stream of jest as he chopped turnips for the refectory pots. He would even tell jokes while he was beat his pupils bloody. At the moment, he was regaling the brothers at this table with a tale involving elaborate hand gestures and some sort of bird call. When he saw Caden approach, however, the grin slipped from his face. "I found the goat!" Caden began with a out preamble. Hang extended both hands as though to stop the words before they reached him. "I am not your Email any longer," he said. Caden blinked. Scalnian, the abbot, resigned acolytes the Emails every year or so, but not usually by surprise, not in the middle of dinner. "What happened?" he asked, suddenly cautious. "It's time for you to move on." "Now?" "The present is the present. Tomorrow will still be now." Caden swallowed. Acerbic remark, and even if Hang was no longer his Umail, the monk could still whip him. "Who am I getting?" he asked instead. "Rampuri Tan," Hang replied, in his voice flat, devoid of the usual laughter. Caden stared. Rampuri Tan did not take pupils. Sometimes, despite his faded brown robe, shaved head, despite the days he spent sitting cross-legged, eyes fixed to his devotion to the Blancon, Tan didn't even seem like a monk at all. There was nothing Caden could put his finger on, but the novices felt it, too. Had developed 100 theories attributing to the man a series of implausible pasts by turn both shadowy and glorious. He earned the scars on his face fighting wild animals in the arena, the Bend. He was a murderer and a thief who had repented his crimes and taken up a life of contemplation. He was disposed brother of some lord or Atret, hiding in Ashkelon only long enough to build his revenge. Caden wasn't much inclined to believe any of the stories, but he had no notice that the common thread of violence and danger, whoever Rampuri Tan had been before arriving to Ashland, Caden wasn't eager to have that man for his Umail. "He is expecting you," Hang continued, something like piety tingling in his voice. "I promised to send you to his cell as soon as you arrived." Caden spared a glance over his shoulder for a table for his friends sat slurping down their stew and enjoying the few unstructured minutes of conversation that were allowed them each day. "Now," Hang said, breaking into his thoughts. The walk from the refectory to the dormitory was not far, 100 paces across the square, then up a short path between two lines of stunted junipers. Caden covered the distance quickly, eager to be out of the wind, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. All the monks, even Scalnin, the abbot, slept in identical chambers opening off the long central hallway. The cells were small, barely large enough to fit a pallet, a rough woven mat, and a couple of shelves, but then the Shin, most of their time outdoors in the workshops or in meditation. Inside the building, out of the slicing wind, Caden slowed, readying himself for the encounter. It was hard to know what to expect. Some masters liked to test students immediately. Some preferred to wait and watch, judging the aptitudes and weakness of the younger monk before deciding on a course of instruction. He just reached a new master, Caden told himself. Hang was a new year ago. and you got used to him. And yet something about the situation felt odd, unsettling. First, the slaughtered goat, then the unexpected transfer when he should have been seated on a long bench with a steaming bowl in front of him, arguing with Akil and the rest of the acolytes. He filled his lungs slowly and then emptied them. Ruri was doing no good. Live now, he told himself, rehearsing one of the 1,000 Shin aphorisms. The future is a dream. And yet, as part of his thoughts, a voice that refused to be settled or settled remained him. Not in dreams were pleasant, and sometimes, no matter how one thrashed or turned, it was impossible to awake. Thank you so much for joining with me. I am Michael Tanner. That was Chapter 2. Join me again for Chapter 3 of The Emperor's Blaze by Brian Staverly. Okay, see you for right now. Good night.